Yo, what up? We are broadcasting live in a suspicious salmon-colored shirt from the edge of my kitchen sink where I've just been washing dishes on live stream. Keeping it all the way real. And this video is going to continue to keep it real. Talking about an issue that's current within the digital vegan demi-monde, but I'm talking about it in a reasonably deep way. So this video will still be meaningful if I come back and watch it myself maybe 5 or 10 years from now, when I've hopefully forgotten, the controversy of the moment that spurs me to make this video. Look, guys, I'm going to kick this off with 2 anecdotes. One from my personal life and one from my professional life, I guess. Back when I was a scholar of Buddhism, I walked into a room in a reasonably ostentatious Buddhist temple in Sri Lanka. And there was a younger monk attending on an older monk who was more or less on his deathbed. So this was an august, respected, and revered senior Buddhist monk, expected to die, I don't know, within days or weeks. But obviously his physical health was deteriorating, and they assumed his mental health was deteriorating as well. And there was the monk I walked in the door with, who was more or less like my interpreter. I wouldn't have been able to walk into that room in that Buddhist temple without him standing next to me. He vouched for me as a Buddhist scholar, if you like. Anyway, so the monk was hoping I would talk to this elder monk about scholarship and translation and research and handwritten Pali manuscripts, the type of thing I was doing. And, you know, I was also doing history and politics and slavery and revolution and all kinds of other stuff, but that's outside the scope of this video. And this monk is overwhelmed with emotion, and he's talking about a specific situation from World War II in very passionate tones. And everybody else in the room, except me, thinks that he's insane. It was a really memorable moment and a really strange scenario. He was talking about an impossible to summarize complex political situation that involves Sri Lanka and Japan, and of course the broader conflict between the British Empire and the Nazis, to simplify slightly. And, you know, he was kind of half weeping as he was talking about it, and evidently he was there and he was involved, and I didn't get the whole story. And I sat down with this Buddhist monk and I held his hand and I looked in his eyes. And because of the cultural context of Buddhism, everyone else in the room just assumes I'm doing the compassionate thing and like pretending to understand what this guy was talking about. But I knew the history. I knew that what he was saying was coherent and meaningful and was about a specific historical situation. And everybody else in the room thought that this guy was lying there on his deathbed and was losing his marbles, that he was... Yeah, I remember one of the monks used exactly that phrase to me. He said, "Oh, it's such a shame, you know, this formerly respected and revered Buddhist monk, he's losing his marbles." Everyone else thought this guy was ranting incoherently just because they didn't know the context and ultimately the political content of what this guy was talking about. And I was rushed out of the room, by the way. They all thought it was very, you know, pious of me to sit down and hold this guy's hand, look into his eyes. But I really knew what he was talking about. I knew that he wasn't crazy. And I never quite learned what his role was in that history. He was old enough. He was alive during World War II. And, you know, he was involved in that situation, which is why he was so overwhelmed with emotion about it. And he was wanting to pass on, you know, before he died, some details, I think not just about the events themselves, but also about the religious ceremonies where they got together, kind of the Japanese and Sri Lankan sides at the end of the war, I think, to reflect on what happened and why. So anyway, the perception of this man as insane haunted me. Everybody in the room is being reasonable and well-intentioned and even ostentatiously compassionate. But in fact, they're judging this guy as insane quite wrongly and dismissing what he had to say, and what he had to say had some real importance. Now, just within the last few days, I've been taking care of my daughter, who is 4 years old, around the clock. I only have custody for 15 days. But for these 15 days, I'm spending as much time with her as possible. And a couple of times, my daughter has said things to me where, in context, I just didn't know what she was talking about. And then a few hours later or a few days later, she puts on some TV show she watches regularly, and suddenly it clicks that what she's saying wasn't crazy. She was discussing a situation in some TV show she watches, a TV show for kids. But when she was telling it to me in the kind of slightly garbled way that 4-year-olds talk, I had no idea what she was talking about, and it seemed like nonsense, or it seemed crazy. To give one example, some of you guys probably relate to, I remember she was talking to me about imagination, and she asked me, this is almost a direct quote, when I use my imagination, do I use a trolley? What? And, trying to be nice to my daughter, and I said, well, where I live in Canada, we don't have a trolley, and where I live in China, we don't have a trolley, And she said, no, this wasn't what you meant. So later, I sat with her and we watched this TV show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's a classic TV show for kids, and I realized, oh, okay, this is what you meant. I had watched that show when I was a child decades ago, and I'd forgotten. Right. When you use your imagination, do you use a trolley? Okay? It's disturbing to me to see people on the internet with absolutely no humor and no detachment and no compassion judging one another as sane and insane. And even someone as despicable as Durianrider. I have stood up in the past. This is the origin of my conflict with Vegan Cheetah. Was back when Vegan Cheetah was making reckless accusations against Durianrider, I stood up and said, no, that's wrong, that's inappropriate. I'm not just standing up against defamation because I don't want to be defamed myself. I don't want anyone to face this kind of defamation and slander. Not even Durianrider. He doesn't deserve that. And I'm not comfortable with people saying that Durianrider is a narcissist or that Durianrider is insane in the reckless way that they do. And there's a famous line from Chris Rock. It's famous to me. Chris Rock is a comedian. Chris Rock stood up on stage one time and said, people go around saying life is short, life is short. No, it's not. Life is long, especially when you make the wrong choices. And a lot of people, it's really easy to perceive them as insane, when the truth is they're just somebody who's made some bad choices. And maybe they're still making bad choices now. Maybe they're making bad choices again and again. But for an outsider looking in, it's really easy to perceive bad choices as insanity. And they're two very different things. I see people judging Durianrider as a narcissist, as having NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, while ignoring all of the evidence about what kind of sanity and what kind of insanity he displays. We have videotape evidence showing this. And while ignoring, the very real record of his own experience with the psychiatric establishment. Now, Durianrider lies about many things. But to give you an example, Durianrider said that when he was still very young, doctors told his parents that they believed he was a compulsive liar or a pathological liar. As I recall, I heard Durianrider say that in his interview with Rich Roll. Rich Roll has a podcast where he interviewed Durianrider. Durianrider has talked about the psychiatric and psychological examinations he underwent as part of a court case, which I believe had to deal with liability and disability following a car accident or an accident with a truck. He's described that at length. So, if anyone making these videos, if you sincerely believe Durianrider had NPD, narcissistic personality disorder as a specific condition, why was he not diagnosed with it at any of these times? And on the other hand, why do we have so many plausible suggestions for what's wrong with him from allegedly real, reportedly, according to him, real psychiatric evaluations he's undergone, which did diagnose him with having very serious psychological problems, very serious psychiatric disorders, but not this one, not NPD, right? So There's a lot of wishful thinking going on here, and it's disturbing to me to see, again, I don't want anyone to be slandered. I didn't defend myself so that people would turn around and slander Durianrider this way. I really, it's really not cool to me. And I've seen videotape of Durianrider doing things. If you really understand NPD, if you really understand narcissistic personality disorder, and if you've really known people diagnosed the condition who really have that condition, then, for example, when you see Durianrider sitting in front of a live audience, which I've seen, and taking questions and taking criticism, unexpected criticism, in the manner that he does, it's impossible for me to believe, watching that videotape, there is real counter evidence that he does not have NPD. Let me tell you something, guys. You can meet someone who is a bulimic and never know they're a bulimic, see no signs of it in their behavior, because the nature of bulimia is a disorder that can be private, it can be personal, it can be one person alone in the bathroom after they eat a meal, etc. There are many, many psychological and psychiatric conditions that are not evident in face-to-face, shallow interactions with people of this kind. NPD is not one of them. NPD is a behavioral disorder. It's a personality disorder of face-to-face behavior between people. That's exactly what people with NPD have the most problem with, right? NPD is a very, very serious disorder. And if you don't know what it is and how it operates, but you meet someone and interact with them face-to-face who has the disorder, you would at the very least get the sense that there's something very seriously wrong with them. And meanwhile, people with the condition, often, not always, but often, can have successful careers as computer programmers or lawyers, doing all kinds of work, provided that the core of the work they can do alone in a cubicle, alone at their cottage. People with NPD very often alternate between seeking the company of others, the adulation of others, the approval of others, the ego validation of others, and running away to be isolated. And that is partly because they feel, with great sorrow, people with NPD really do feel the indifference and even boredom and disapproval of those around them when people fail to give them the kind of validation and gratification they're seeking. I don't see progress for the vegan movement in switching from the kind of slander that Durianrider used to direct against others to the kind of slander I now see directed against Durianrider. That's not progress. That's not why I had my fundraiser and had my legal case. Progress is if we progress beyond this kind of slander entirely. It's impossible for me to verify the honesty of anything Durianrider says because he's lied about many, many things. But so far as I know, what he has said about his own psychiatric diagnoses, put it this way, I take it seriously. He's talked about his own experiences with psychiatrists and psychotherapists and so on. And I've always said it's strange to me that his followers don't just take that more seriously. And whether you react with compassion or contempt is up to you. But there's no point constructing new fables or new slander or new innuendo against these people. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. It's not good for veganism, etc. I have brothers. My father had a lot of kids. I have brothers and half-brothers, what have you, who just made terrible choices with their lives. A lot of those choices are invisible in our culture and our society. I have several brothers who, from my perspective, I would consider to be alcoholics. I think within Canada or within England, they're not considered alcoholics because a very high level of drinking is considered acceptable or invisible. People make bad choices. Life is long, especially when you make the wrong choices. It's really, really easy to perceive someone else's choices from the outside without understanding the context, without understanding the politics, without understanding the other options they had. It's really easy to perceive that as insanity. I do think insanity is a problem in the movement. I've made myself very unpopular by talking about how important it is that we work with people in politics who are really reliable, who are really sane, that we're honest with ourselves. We don't dismiss the significance of psychiatric problems when we're choosing who are our allies, who are our colleagues in the movement, etc., etc. But in the same way that I once sat down in that room with that Buddhist monk, and everyone else perceived this guy as insane, you've got to treat people with enough detachment, compassion, insight, just patience, just hearing their side of the story. It's skepticism of another kind, to say, well, am I yet at the point where I can judge whether this person is sane or insane? Am I yet at the point where I can judge why did they make the bad choices that they've made in their lives? Sometimes people make bad choices for good reasons. Sometimes they make bad choices for reasons that make sense to themselves and themselves alone. And sometimes they make bad choices for no good reason at all. But none of those things makes you insane. Insanity is something very different. And a specific diagnosis, like narcissistic personality disorder, is something very different again.